This is the guided reading for the Spanish-American War. I'm going to read through this with you. You can follow along with me. This document is attached in the folder on Schoology. You might want to have it open while you are doing the check for understanding. That seems to be the best way to do this. But I'll read through this with you right now to make sure you understand what's going on. I'll read the main ideas first. Number one, in 1898, the United States went to war with Spain in the Spanish-American War. Number two, the United States gained territories in the Caribbean and Pacific. So this is just a summary of the section from Module 23. This just kind of condenses it down into the basic ideas. Key terms and people that are mentioned in this section, one of them is yellow journalism. That's the technique that exaggerates and sensationalizes news stories. The Teller Amendment was a war resolution amendment stating that the United States had no interest in taking control of Cuba. Emilio Aguinaldo was the leader of Filipino rebels against Spain. In case you don't know, Filipinos are people who live in the Philippines. The Anti-Imperialist League was an organization that opposed the creation of an American colonial empire and involvement in the affairs of Cuba and other island territories. The Platt Amendment was an amendment to Cuba's constitution that limited Cuba's rights and kept the United States involved in Cuban affairs. So here's the lesson summary. Whenever you complete a worksheet or an assignment where there's a reading and questions, it's always a good idea to read the questions first. On this document, there are questions printed in the margins, and it kind of highlights the main ideas that you should be looking for. We should be looking for an answer to this question. Why did publishers such as Pulitzer and Hearst resort to yellow journalism? Why was the war fought in the Pacific as well as in Cuba? Why would Filipinos want to help the United States fight the Spanish? Why did many Americans oppose the U.S. control of more land? And that's it. So those are the ideas we want to look for as we read. I'm going to go back to the beginning. Here we go. War with Spain. During the 1890s, Cuba rebelled against Spain, and many Americans were sympathetic to the Cubans. Two Americans who supported the rebellion were Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst, powerful newspaper publishers. They used yellow journalism and published exaggerated stories. This technique sold more newspapers and increased American support for Cuba. Hearst published a letter in which a Spanish official referred to President McKinley as weak. Many Americans were insulted. Before that, the U.S. battleship Maine had exploded in Cuba's Havana harbor. No one knew the cause, but many Americans believed that Spain was responsible. In response, the U.S. Congress declared that Cuba was an independent country. They also passed the Teller Amendment, which stated that America would not take control of Cuba. Spain immediately declared war, and fighting began in Cuba. The U.S. began fighting in the Philippines, a Spanish colony in the Pacific. Commodore George Dewey and the U.S. Navy destroyed Spain's fleet. Filipino rebels led by Emilio Aguinaldo then helped them take control of Manila, the capital. Other U.S. troops focused on the Caribbean Sea. These troops included the Rough Riders, led by future President Theodore Roosevelt. After the United States won battles both on land, in Cuba and Puerto Rico, and at sea, Spain surrendered. United States gains territories. The peace treaty with Spain put Cuba, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines under U.S. control. A group of Americans formed the Anti-Imperialist League. The group feared the United States wanted to build an empire and deny self-government to the territories. Despite its work, the treaty passed. The United States set up a military government in Cuba and added the Platt Amendment to Cuba's new constitution. This allowed the United States to stay involved in Cuba's affairs and limited Cuba's right to make treaties. The amendment remained in force until 1934. The United States stayed active in Cuban affairs until the late 1950s. The U.S. decided to keep the Philippines and Puerto Rico as territories. Puerto Ricans became U.S. citizens in 1917. Today, Puerto Rico has its own constitution, but it is still associated with the U.S. Filipinos fought for their independence, and in 1902, Congress established an appointed governor and elected legislature in the Philippines. The country gained independence in 1946.